João stood at the bustling Lisbon airport, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen Zeus, his loyal bomb-sniffing dog, in 2 years. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity as he anxiously shifted from foot to foot, his eyes glued to the arrival's gate. Would Zeus remember him after all this time? That question had haunted João from the moment he learned that Zeus was retiring from military service. So many memories flooded his mind, the missions, the danger, and the trust they had built together. But now, the thought of seeing his old friend again filled him with a mix of excitement and doubt. The flight landed. Passengers started pouring out, some with families, others alone, all moving quickly, eager to reunite with loved ones. João's breath hitched as he scanned every face, searching for a sign of Zeus. Then suddenly, there they were. Zeus turned the corner, his handler holding his leash. João's knees nearly buckled at the sight. Zeus, a little older now, his fur slightly grayer around the muzzle, but still the powerful, focused dog João remembered. Without thinking, João dropped to one knee, gesturing toward Zeus, his voice caught in his throat. "Zeus," he called out softly, barely able to contain the flood of emotions. This was the moment he had dreamt of for so long, the moment that would answer all his questions. Would Zeus recognize him? The camera shifts focus, and a calm voice cuts through the emotional haze. "Welcome to Hero Dogs," Marcos Diaz begins, his voice steady, yet filled with admiration. Today, we follow the story of João, a former military sergeant, and Zeus, the dog that saved his life more times than he can count. The screen fades into the dusty fields of Mozambique, where João first met Zeus. João had been a part of the Portuguese military station there for a series of dangerous missions, but at the time, he didn't know that Zeus, a specially trained bomb-sniffing Labrador, would become his most trusted partner. "We worked together from the start, but it wasn't always easy," João's voiceover begins, his words filled with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "At first, it was just a job. Zeus would sniff out explosives, and I'd lead the team. But things changed quickly." A flashback shows a younger João, nervous but focused, walking side by side with Zeus on their first mission. The tension is palpable as the team moves cautiously through rough terrain. Zeus pauses, his nose twitching. João, unsure, tenses up. "That day, Zeus saved my life," João recalls. Zeus had detected a hidden explosive buried just inches from where João was about to step. The dog didn't hesitate, but João had hesitated. In those split seconds, Zeus's calm behavior taught him something essential: trust. From that day on, João knew Zeus wasn't just a tool of war, he was a lifeline. The bond they developed went far beyond the field. During every mission, every sleepless night, and each moment of terror, Zeus was there, steady and unwavering. "I started trusting him with my life, and in return, he trusted me with his." João's voice breaks for a moment, and the scene returns to the present, back to the airport. The bond they shared became more than just survival. It became love. João watches, waiting to see if that trust was still there after all this time. João's mind drifted back to the most harrowing days in Mozambique, where he and Zeus faced death at every corner. Zeus wasn't just any dog. He was the best bomb-sniffing dog João had ever seen. Their missions together had become a rhythm, a dangerous dance through landscapes riddled with hidden threats, IEDs, landmines, and ambushes. Every step they took could have been their last, but Zeus's sharp instincts kept them alive. "Zeus could sense danger before I even knew it was there," João narrates as a flashback shows them deep in the Mozambican countryside. The sun was relentless, the air heavy with dust, and every move felt like a gamble with fate. Zeus was always ahead, his nose to the ground, scanning the earth like a living radar. The scene cuts to one specific mission, where their unit had been tasked with clearing a path through a suspected insurgent zone. Juon remembers the tightness in his chest that day, the sense that something wasn't right. Zeus had stopped in his tracks, ears perked, tail stiff. The other soldiers were moving forward, unaware of the deadly trap just ahead. "Stop!" Juon's voice had cut through the noise, halting the entire team. Everyone froze as Zeus led Juon carefully toward a patch of dirt that looked just like any other. But beneath it, buried deep, was a pressure-activated bomb, ready to obliterate anyone who came too close. That was when I knew. Juon's voice is thick with emotion. Zeus didn't just protect me, he protected all of us. In that moment, it became clear to Juon that this dog, this partner, wasn't just doing his job. Zeus was family, someone he couldn't imagine losing. As their missions piled up, the two became inseparable. Wherever Juon went, Zeus followed. And when the firefights erupted, Zeus was trained to stay low, his eyes always on Juon, waiting for the next command. But their time together was drawing to an end. After 2 grueling tours in Mozambique, Juon's deployment was over. His time as a soldier had come to a close, but Zeus was still needed. Another handler required Zeus's skills, and despite Juon's growing attachment, he had to let go. "I had to leave him behind," Juon admits, his voice raw with the pain of that memory. "It was one of the hardest things I've ever done." The flashback fades, and we return to Juon standing at the airport. The reality of those years apart, settling heavy on his shoulders. His hand clenched into a fist at his side as he watched Zeus from across the terminal, remembering that last day. Would Zeus remember him after all the time apart, after all they had been through? Or was that bond broken forever? As Juon stood at the airport, the memories of leaving Zeus behind in Mozambique burned fresh in his mind. It wasn't supposed to be forever. At least, that's what he told himself back then. But as the months turned into years, the hope of seeing Zeus again had started to feel like a distant dream. The day Juon left the military, there was no grand farewell between them. Zeus was needed for another mission, with another handler. Juon watched as they drove off, Zeus looking out the window, unaware it might be the last time he saw his handler, his partner, his friend. Juon had turned away before the vehicle disappeared from sight, the weight of the separation nearly unbearable. Back in Portugal, Juon tried to move on. He started a new life, new job, new home, even got engaged to Marta, another soldier he had served with. But Zeus was always on his mind. He found himself scanning news about military dogs, hoping to catch some word about Zeus, though he never did. Then, one day, the call came. Zeus was finally retiring. Juon's heart leaped with a mixture of joy and anxiety. After all this time, could it really be happening? Could Zeus come home? But hope quickly turned to worry when he realized the cost involved. Transporting a retired military dog like Zeus from Africa to Portugal wasn't just complicated, it was expensive. Thousands of euros he didn't have. Juon sank into a familiar pit of frustration. Was this how their story would end? With Zeus spending his final years somewhere far away without the man who owed him his life. But then, a ray of hope emerged. Ana Torres, a dedicated flight attendant who had heard Juon's story, reached out. She had been helping retired military dogs reunite with their handlers for years, covering the costs herself. "I knew I had to help when I heard about Zeus," Anna had said when they first spoke. João couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the sleepless nights and endless worry, there was finally a way to bring Zeus home. Anna arranged everything, from the flight to the paperwork. It was happening. Zeus was on his way back to Portugal. And now, here he was, standing in the middle of the Lisbon airport, just moments away from seeing his best friend again. But the doubt gnawed at him. What if Zeus didn't recognize him after all this time? What if the bond they had shared had faded into nothing? João's heart raced as the handler led Zeus closer, but Zeus didn't rush. His gaze scanned the terminal, calm but searching. João dropped to his knees, his voice cracking as he called out, "Zeus!" Would the dog recognize his voice? Would he remember the man who had trusted him with his life? For a moment, everything in the busy airport seemed to freeze. João's voice trembled as he called out again, "Zeus!" His heart pounded, eyes locked on the dog, waiting for any sign, anything that showed Zeus remembered. Zeus paused, his ears perking up at the familiar sound. His handler stood still, holding the leash, but something shifted in Zeus. His gaze, once calm and distant, now sharpened. His nose twitched as if catching a scent carried on the air. Slowly, the dog turned his head toward João. And then it happened. Zeus's tail began to wag, at first just a small flicker, then faster and faster. His eyes widened, filled with recognition. Without hesitation, Zeus yanked the leash from his handler's hand and sprinted toward João with all the strength his older body could muster. João's chest tightened with emotion as he opened his arms, kneeling on the cold airport floor. He could barely breathe. "Zeus!" he called again, this time his voice breaking completely, no longer able to hold back the tears that stung his eyes. The next moment was a blur of fur and laughter and tears. Zeus barreled into João, nearly knocking him over, his large paws pushing against João's chest. The dog's tail wagged uncontrollably, his head burying into João's neck as if trying to make up for the 2 long years they had spent apart. João wrapped his arms tightly around Zeus, feeling the warmth of his fur, the familiar scent of his loyal friend. He didn't care about the stares from the people around them, the airport noise, or anything else in that moment. It was just him and Zeus, together again. "You remember me," João whispered, pressing his face into the dog's neck. "You didn't forget." Zeus licked João's face, his usual calm demeanor completely shattered by the excitement of their reunion. For the first time in years, João felt whole again, like a missing piece of him had finally been restored. All the uncertainty, the fear that Zeus might not remember him, vanished in that instant. The handler, who had been taking care of Zeus, approached, smiling at the scene. "I think it's safe to say he remembers you," the handler said, laughing lightly as he watched the emotional reunion. João nodded, wiping away tears, unable to find the words to express the depth of his relief and joy. "You have no idea how much this means to me," João said, his voice still thick with emotion. He's my family." The handler smiled. "Zeus is a special one, that's for sure. But it's clear you're his world, João. He never forgot you." João stood up, still keeping a hand on Zeus's head, scratching behind his ears like he used to. Zeus stayed close, leaning into him, as if afraid to lose him again. João looked down at Zeus, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "Let's go home, buddy," he said softly. "You're finally home." With Zeus by his side, João walked out of the airport, feeling like he had just been given a second chance. João and Zeus stepped out of the airport into the bright Lisbon afternoon, the weight of the past 2 years lifting with every step they took together. For the first time in a long time, Juon felt at peace. Zeus, now by his side, seemed just as relieved, sticking close to Juon as they made their way to the car. The entire drive home, Juon kept glancing at Zeus in the passenger seat, still in disbelief that his old partner was really there. Once they arrived at Juon's home, Zeus explored his new surroundings cautiously at first, but it didn't take long for him to settle in. Juon's fiancée, Marta, greeted them at the door, her face lighting up when she saw Zeus. "So, this is the hero dog I've heard so much about," she said, kneeling down to pet Zeus. Juon smiled, watching as Zeus immediately warmed up to her. "Yeah," he replied, his voice soft. "He's more than that. He saved my life, more times than I can count." Marta looked up at Juon, her expression full of understanding. "You saved each other," she said quietly. Over the next few weeks, Zeus adapted to his new life. No more missions, no more explosions to sniff out. Instead, there were lazy afternoons in the backyard, walks along the coastline, and plenty of well-deserved rest. Juon made it his mission to make sure Zeus had the best retirement possible. After all the dangers and the horrors they had been through, Zeus had earned every bit of comfort and love Juon could give him. Still, Juon couldn't help but notice the changes in Zeus. He was older now, moving slower than he used to. Sometimes Juon would see the dog's eyes cloud with a distant look, as if he were back in the battlefield, reliving those dangerous days. The war had left scars on both of them, not all of them visible. One night, as Juon sat on the porch with Zeus resting at his feet, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I wish you could talk, buddy. I wonder how much of all that you still carry inside." He reached down, gently patting Zeus on the head. Zeus looked up at him, his eyes full of loyalty and trust, as if telling Juon that no matter the past, he was happy just being by his side. Marta joined them, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Juon and sat down beside him. "He's been through a lot, Juon," she said, her eyes following Zeus as he curled up on the porch. "But he's safe now, with us." Juon nodded, his heart heavy with both relief and concern. "I just want him to have a peaceful life from now on," he said. "He deserves it." "And he will," Marta replied, her hand resting on Juon's arm. "We'll make sure of that." From that point on, Juon dedicated every day to giving Zeus the life he had earned. They would go on long walks through the countryside, Zeus trotting slowly but happily at Juon's side. They would spend evenings watching the sunset, and Zeus always followed Juon wherever he went, never letting him out of sight. Juon knew their time together was precious, and he cherished every moment. He had been given a second chance to be with Zeus, and he wasn't going to waste a single day. As the days passed, Juon couldn't help but notice that Zeus, despite his joy at being reunited, still carried the weight of their shared past. Every now and then, Zeus would jolt awake from sleep, his body tense, his eyes wide and alert, as if he were back in a war zone. The nightmares were subtle at first, just the faint twitch of his paws or a soft whine, but they became more frequent. Juon recognized it all too well. It was the same trauma he and many soldiers carried home. One afternoon, as Juon sat on the couch, Zeus resting his head in his lap, Marta joined them, her face filled with concern. "He's struggling, isn't he?" she asked softly, her eyes lingering on the dog, who twitched slightly in his sleep. Juon sighed, running his hand gently through Zeus's fur. "Yeah, I think the war left scars on him too," he said, "just like it did on me." He looked at Marta, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard seeing him like this. He saved me so many times, and now..." I don't know how to help him. Marta squeezed Joan's hand. We'll figure it out, Joan. Zeus deserves peace, and so do you. Determined to help Zeus recover from his trauma, Joan reached out to a local animal therapist who specialized in military dogs. Together, they worked on ways to ease Zeus's anxiety, slowly desensitizing him from loud noises and sudden movements that triggered his memories of the battlefield. Joan took part in every session, wanting to be there every step of the way. Zeus responded well. Over time, the nightmares became less frequent, and the tension in his body began to ease. Joan could see the spark returning to Zeus's eyes, the same spark he had seen in Mozambique when they were a team, side by side, trusting each other with their lives. During this time, Ana Torres, the flight attendant who had brought Zeus home, reached out to Joan. She was starting a non-profit organization dedicated to reuniting more military dogs with their handlers, inspired by the powerful bond she had witnessed between Joan and Zeus. She asked Joan to join the board, knowing his experience and passion for these dogs would be invaluable. I'd be honored, Joan said during their conversation. Zeus isn't the only one who needs a home after the war. There are so many more like him, and if I can help even one more dog find peace, it'll be worth it. Zeus was now much older, his muzzle almost entirely gray and his movements slower than ever. But there was a calmness in him, a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Joan knew their time together was limited, and that thought always sat heavy in his heart. But he also knew that every day they had was a gift. On one quiet evening, as Joan, Marta, and Zeus sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon, Joan looked at his old friend, now peacefully asleep, at his feet. I don't know how much longer we have, buddy, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But I promise you, as long as we're together, you'll never have to be afraid again. Zeus stirred slightly, his ears twitching at the sound of Joan's voice, but he didn't wake. For Joan, that was enough. He had done everything he could to give Zeus the peaceful life he deserved. A life far removed from the war, from the fear, from the constant threat of danger. The bond they shared had survived battlefields, separation, and time. Now, in these final years, it was stronger than ever. Joan knew that when the time came to say goodbye, it would hurt, but he also knew that they had both been lucky to have found each other, to have saved each other. And as the stars began to dot the sky, Joan closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that, after everything, they were finally home. This concludes the final part of Joan and Zeus's story, a journey marked by loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog.